On today's episode, Courtney and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Rob Smith with Fidelis Advisors, and we're going to jump into and break down organic growth, scalability, sustainability, productivity, and we really take a deep dive into the organic growth and the sustainability. And there's a really great question, multiple questions. We took over a page of notes in this episode. It's extremely good, but the one thing that I just continued to write down was, what problem are you seeking to solve and how efficiently can you solve that problem? What are you good at? What are you prioritizing? How are you measuring your growth and how are you doing it organically and profitable? All right. So with that being said, let's start the show. Hey, welcome to the Insurance Buzz. We are your hosts, Michael and Courtney Weaver. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Rob Smith. Rob, how you doing, my man?
Man, I'm just rolling in clover. It's great to see you both, and I love the opportunity to spend time with you all. I've been looking forward to this for a minute.
Let's go. Rolling in clover, baby.
I don't know what that means. Can we explain, what does the phrase rolling in clover mean? Like, you're doing great?
It's a frolic,
Oh, you're
right? I
frolicking?
mean, life is so good. You're just laying out there in the backyard, sunshine coming down just like it is here in eclipse-centric, southern Texas, and just go in that backyard and roll all over the blue bonnets and the whole bit. Just a pure expression of joy.
I am going to start using that everywhere I go now, because frolic, when I'm like, let's just frolic through the meadow, Michael's like, we're frolicking. I'm like, yeah, it's the same kind of phrase. So rolling in clover is
I
just
love
like
it.
Pure joy.
And frolic is just an underrated term. It's definitely underutilized.
Oh my gosh. And now I'm going to have to get a shirt made. Let's frolic. All right.
I'm
That's
in.
not what we're going to talk about today, though. We're going to get
I'm gonna get
into.
first edition.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Mm.
I'll let you approve the rights. You'll get the first, like, make sure that it, looks good and we can promote it and do the whole thing.
All right, let's frolic a little bit.
Let's frolic in some insurance, baby.
All right, so today we're talking
Some
about
insurance frolicking. On
That's
its way.
right. That's right.
Perfect.
So we're going to be talking about some organic growth. We're going to be talking about productivity, scalability, sustainability. So let's just dive right into it from a growth standpoint. So this is what you help insurance companies, insurance agencies. You're an advisor, and you kind of help with these. You help with just more than these four aspects, but specifically what we're going to be diagnosing and kind of tackling today are these four aspects of it. So let's get into the organic growth. If an agent is wanting to grow their agency, what are you finding to help find those high propensity type of prospects or customers that an agent would want to target? Like, what kind of data could they be looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. And I just kind of share with the folks tuning in that these perspectives have been colored by kind of a pretty significant kind of journey through insurance distribution and specifically businesses that had acquired previously independent insurance agencies and brokers, and really having the blessing and the opportunity to get close to several hundred of these businesses. And it kind of gives you an opportunity to observe those businesses that had demonstrated a propensity to be high growth. And if there are a couple observations I make about organic growth, number one, these businesses tend to be very intentional about it, right? And so it became a hallmark or a characteristic that they were very focused on as sort of a differentiator or something to distinguish the business that they built. And there were a couple of attributes relating to that you would commonly see. And I thought it was very interesting that a pretty significant proportion of these businesses were very CRM centric, right? I mean, so you think about whether it's an independent insurance agency or a captive, whatever it is, but their sort of system of record was their customer relationship management system, and all of the other systems that they had in place, whether it's some kind of marketing technology or automation, or their financial systems, or their policy or agency management systems, were all oriented around the customer or the client as that sort of primary unit. And I think that that's very telling in terms of how those businesses are orchestrated. The other thing I would point out is, in terms of approach, or in terms of how those businesses seek to engage in their communities or seek to promote the kind of value that they bring and the kind of work that they do on behalf of their clients, is that they tend to be more data centric than most. And by that, I mean, they would capture the necessary, the kind of information about their existing customers and clients, about their needs, about their characteristics, and then they would take that information and be very thoughtful about how they might purpose it into some kind of outreach. And whether that means, hey, I know because I'm actually tracking what I'm doing for 2 or 4 or 6 or 10 clients in a certain category, a place that we have some expertise, that I know that these other 2 or 4 or 10 other clients that are, consuming fewer insurance products, or transferring less of their risks away. What does that look like? And how do I map A to B? And how do I take those, we'll call them example clients that are doing certain things based on the advice that we've given them, and transport that and replicate that in this other set of clients that may not be doing some of those similar things. And I think the key there is, it's hard to give that advice, and it's hard to make that connection if you don't have the information. And so taking the time to curate that data and to put it in usable formats that you can then capitalize on to better serve your clients, but also to grow your business. And then you can extend that one further and say, okay, we know we have a competency in this category. We now have a significant concentration of clients in a certain occupation, right? Maybe it's, electrical contractors or whatever it happens to be. Well, then it gives you sight lines into the external world and say, well, how do I position myself? How do I promote myself to these businesses where I've got a lot of accumulated expertise? I can really help these folks, right? But again, it all gets back to, how do you treat your business information? What do you do with your data? Because then if you take that kind of back end approach, well, why then you can feed a variety of different systems. You can feed a variety of different strategies that will serve to support the growth in the business. And frankly, there are some opportunities for automation so that you can go attract that additional business with fairly attractive economics, right? I mean, certainly always more efficient to maintain, fairly high renewal rates, right? I mean, cost of customer acquisition is not a joke, right? So you want to keep the ones that you have and serve them well. But there are some strategies and techniques that will support businesses in that process of new client acquisition. And you can do it in ways that are rational and sensible for, the economic environment that you're working in. And then obviously there's some downstream considerations that are important too, relating to producer attraction, retention, and incentives, and making sure those are wisely aligned to the kind of outputs that you want. And, obviously you want to baseline where your business is today, and be thoughtful about, new business incentives and compensation structures around trail and all that happy stuff. But I think when you begin to put it together, you see a systemic notion, an intentional notion of a business that understands how to relate those things to one another to create the kind of overall environment that's going to produce disproportionate growth.
So I don't want to get too far down this because you've thrown out a lot of different things that we could really unpack. But I want to go back to talking about focusing on the data and then measuring that, implementing that, and using that to your advantage. Because I know for me as an entrepreneur, it's not that I don't have access to the information, it's that I don't know exactly what information I should be paying attention to
Yep.
in terms of growing my business and also growing customer satisfaction, retention, longevity, like their LTV, right? How do I keep them here as long as possible? So if you're sitting down with an insurance professional and we're going to talk about data and what data to pay attention to, how to measure it, and then how to implement it, where do I start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing you do is you sort of make a determination about, where does the business information that you've cultivated or curated through time live, right? And is it in a reasonable or a sort of an accessible environment, so that you can kind of get your hands around it, and begin to think about, how would I manipulate it? What would I do with it if I had the opportunity to do something with it differently? And then begin to map out what that approach looks like just with the raw information, right? So it's basically doing a baselining exercise to say, okay, here's what you've done through time. Here's where it lives. Here's how we might put it into a frame or a format that we could then do some additional kind of layered assessments and all the stuff to figure out, okay, how does this empower? How does this give information that we might then purpose to undertake some set of further activities, whether it's around, account rounding or cross sell, whether it's around giving good sight lines to a producer around where they might find something that they can pursue or ideally exploit, might give you some sight lines into where clients or potential clients that you might seek to serve are likely to be concentrated, where they're likely to focus their attentions and activities, and then what kinds of messages are likely to be receptive to those. But I think from that sort of initial framing of saying, how do I get my hands around the information? I think that's one piece of it. But I think the other thing that you want to kind of keep in mind as you frame that exercise is, based on what you've done to present and what you might aspire to do in the future, what problems are you seeking to solve and for whom? Right? What are you good at? What can you point to as a distinctive that says, listen, you know, I've got an index or an assortment of clients that I've done some really impactful things for, and what is that expression, right? How do I represent that equation? I've been able to do or deliver value or solve problems for the following communities of individuals, the following groupings of clients, and really sort of nail that in, because I think then that informs your approach to the information that you've then identified, and you bring that forward into some kind of usable context so it can feed, whatever kind of system you're going to feed. These are choices, and choice A versus choice B around a variety of systems. I don't know if that's necessarily sort of the end state. That's part of the process, but it's getting that information and aligning it with that fundamental question about what problem are you seeking to solve and for whom, and then what's the most efficient way that I can express that or that I can externalize that, so that we're making or creating this awareness around this unique thing that we do, around this distinctive value proposition that we have, and then carrying that process forward so that you begin to have those opportunities with those businesses. And I just think the key there is to be very clear about that fundamental equation, and then to be efficient in terms of how you're actually getting that awareness or raising that awareness about the great things that you're able to do.
I love that question. Like, what problem are you seeking to solve? Because so many times, specifically as I would even say a captive insurance agent, you have carriers pushing your auto, your fire, your life, your Medicare, pet policies, like all kinds of shit like that you have to be the so-called expert at. And it's like, most team sizes are really small, and it's like if you can just narrow down to what you're really really good at, what you're passionate about, what you want to help customers with, that's when you absolutely crush it in the insurance space. Like chasing all these little promotions, and it just causes confusion in my experience with the team. And so I love what you've done here as far as like, what are you good at? What problem are you seeking to solve? And then how efficiently are you going to get the brand awareness to those types of prospects or customers? And so if you're listening to this right now, I would ask you this question right now. What problem are you seeking to solve? What do you want to be known for? What are you the expert at? And really take some time to get clarity on this.
Mike, that's a great observation, and I would just add to that. It is very easy to get belabored by this perpetual cycle of noise, right? I mean, to your point, incentives and various channel partners all sort of having these inputs and having these demands, and I think having that sort of that centering conversation with a business to say, look, let's get it back to the fundamentals. Like, here's what the information tells us. And then when we set about this journey, or we started to do the business that we're doing, it was to solve problems in a variety of ways for either for a community or an industry or whatever it happens to be. But just to sort of get back to that sort of essential feature of the business, what problem are you trying to solve and for whom? And then how do you amplify that message so that the people who you might serve gain that understanding, and are able to access you in ways that make sense, that are positive in that regard, and permit you to do the things that you are well suited to do for them, but to do it in an efficient and effective way. And so I think a lot of it just gets back to that kind of clarifying statement, as you said.
So when you're having these conversations, because insurance is such a reactive game, it moves at such a high speed, it moves very reactive, and really carving out intentional time to focus and assess the business isn't something that I see agents and producers doing a lot, is really slowing down and taking like a bird's eye view of what's going on. So when you are having these conversations, do they show you like what their week looks like? Like I'm curious if somebody is set up for success? Like you can see like, okay, they have organic growth, they're going to get some traction here and they're going to scale. Are there certain indicators like with their schedule, how they're communicating with their
Mm.
team, how they're setting up their own personal day that you can see right off the bat?
Yeah, I think there are a number of indicators. That's actually a great question. And so when you're having these conversations, what you'll usually find, at least in my experiences, the businesses that have been able to scale, the businesses that have a growth trajectory, they commonly have a plan to say, listen, it's very easy to get pulled into a variety of things. I'm going to have the discipline to know which individuals or which functions are going to be sort of allocated the following activities, right? And so there's some intentionality about workflow, there's some intentionality about choice. It's very prescriptive about who is going to be performing what activity at what time and with what result in mind. And the other thing that you'll sort of find is that where there are opportunities to create supportive structures to not get dragged into the fog, those opportunities have been taken advantage of. So someone will come and say, look, yes, we get however many hundred inbound calls in a week. And no, it's not commonly someone saying, "Hey, I'm here to sign up as a new client," right? It's the existing clients that you have that have every right to your attention and to receive good service. But have you thought about, right? I mean, what's your approach to taking and allocating inbound calls? Have you had the opportunity to put in place some kind of virtual assistant or some kind of self-service automation that permits a vast majority of those inbound calls who are simply seeking a solution? They're not necessarily seeking a recipe for grandma's banana bread or wanting to talk for half an hour. And you should make time to do those things, right? I mean, it is ultimately fundamentally a relational business. But have you taken the time to think through the architecture of your business so that you can minimize, Courtney, what you said is minimize that reactivity? And so the opportunity to say, look, there is going to be a fundamental level. There's going to be a foundational level of intersection that you have to have in resolving a variety of tasks, and you are always going to need client oriented and people oriented and service oriented people in the system that can facilitate, can make sure quality is maintained, that can exercise judgment, discretion, and discernment in the engagement with your clients and with potential clients. But the opportunities to either use structure, right? Use intentional workflows that are designed, and also to use systems and supportive technologies to minimize the amount of rote, repetitive tasks that occur throughout the day in ways that can be managed quite effectively, consistently, and without error or disruption, anything like that. I think the businesses that have demonstrated it doesn't need to be perfect. And I think businesses are always working towards identifying that optimization function around efficiency and effectiveness from an operational standpoint. But those businesses that have made the effort to embrace, that have pulled back far enough to see that, look, I mean, we can't grow beyond a certain threshold unless we begin to address the opportunities that exist to run sort of a high performance, operationally efficient regime. And then what's the relationship between what is it that people do best? What is it that machines do best and automation do best? And allow everything to sort of, go to its sort of highest and best use in terms of function, activity, time, and attention. And so I think those are the hallmarks of those businesses. And that's where, frankly, it's a lot of fun to be able to talk to those, whether they be founders or whatever it happens to be, but people that are governing and guiding these businesses to help them sort of make those evaluations about what's your market opportunity, what's available to you, what's your runway, and how much of that are you capitalizing on, and how much of that is because you've got sort of the residue of these unintentional outcomes, right? Things that have just sort of gone on for a period of time, and you've just sort of continued to try to function in that way, kind of operate in that way. Is it a good time to take a step back, take a look, and say, is there a better way that we can do this so that we can become more productive? And in that way, then begin to realize more of the opportunity that we have in front of us.
So we've talked about growth, talked a little bit about productivity. I want to go to sustainability because what I see is I see specifically a lot of on social medias bragging about I produced this much, I wrote this much, but no one's talking about the issued policies or the lapse can on the back end. All right. And so when you dig into some of these conversations that we get to have, and you find out that
I want to talk
sure,
about money, like
yeah,
real money.
because sustainability is about, I mean, that's why people get into business, like
Yeah.
a cash flow machine, specifically insurance renewals. Well, when somebody may be producing big numbers, but you have a 40, 50, 60% lapse can, that is not a sustainable freaking business. I am sorry, but you're chasing these company bonuses, like yada, yada, yada. At any point in time, they take those off the table. You're broke. You're no longer in business. All right. So, what are you seeing from a sustainability standpoint of the best that you work with? What practices, what fundamentals do they have in place to make sure that they are fundamentally growing in a sustainable way that they can continue to grow year after year in a profitable manner?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a natural distinction, right, to be made between businesses that are, attempting to accomplish certain things in a very near-term time frame, right? I mean, are they contemplating a transaction? Are they there are things that businesses will do to elevate performance in a certain category over a defined period of time. And you see it with incentives, right? I mean, you see it with these sort of luxurious production incentives, or you see it with potential earnout incentives, or all kinds of things, right? And what you'll discover in those environments is people react, right? I mean, there's a compensation dimension to it, and people will run real hard for a minute, and they'll pull out every trick that they know how to do, and you get this like momentary spike in production, and sometimes that is accompanied by relative austerity on the expense side, and all that, and you get in this environment where for a minute, right, you're a wildly profitable business, or at least so it would seem. And but some of the issues with that are, number one, it's not durable, right? I mean, any time that I mean, because if you're operating in an environment like that, of either eventually the outsized incentive goes away, or the profitability of the business, if everything's being tied to pure upfront new business activity and not much attention is being paid elsewhere, right? So when we think about sustainability, what we're really thinking about is building that ecosystem with the right technologies, the right infrastructure, the right practices, the right kinds of roles and responsibilities, and people to occupy those roles and responsibilities, and then kind of a sustainable um, incentive structure and scheme, so that all of those things relating together will permit you to do a few things, right? It's that notion of systematic versus idiosyncratic, that notion of, hey, look, if you're going to have a set of behaviors that will not persist, you can't expect the result to persist, right? And there is that kind of magical thinking that people will engage in business and also not in business, right? I mean, you see people going on a short-term diet and expect to be, but like, hey, look, we're gonna depart that, and then they're shocked when everything goes back to the way it was before. And it's like, temporary changes do not typically result in permanent outcomes, right? And making sure that from a foundational standpoint, whether it's business information, whether it's the technologies you have, whether it's the processes that you engage in relating to those technologies, and the intersection between workflow and those key business processes and the technologies you've chosen. But in reality, it's sort of aligning those, orienting those towards, where do you anticipate, or where would you aspire for the business to be? Do those line up, right? And then it's really understanding, okay, will that stack, will that structure permit scaling? Will it permit efficient assimilation of new businesses, of potentially add-on businesses or new clients? And then, is it set in such a way that if all of those things are true, there's nothing that you've done, right, that's going to cause that system, to cause that progression to break down, whether it be compensation, technology, practices, all of it. Is there anything endemic to how you've built it, or how you've achieved a certain performance threshold that you've sort of built in a fail, right? And so everything that you're doing to think about a performance environment, everything that you're doing, it's that combination of organic growth plus healthy productivity and profitability. If there's a deficit there, sort of bringing it into a healthy range. If there is no deficit there, great, right? But do those unit economics attach to all of the different things that you would then anticipate doing to continuing to grow and scale the business? And it's just that reliability, sustainability dimension. Is there a bust case, right? Where, okay, that's great, but that won't work as you're trying to get to $3 million or $5 million or $10 million or whatever, or out a year, out 2 years, out 10 years. Where are the fail cases built into that, and just making sure that all of those different things that orient towards the business as it is today and where you anticipate or aspire for it to be are going to be fulfilled reliably, sustainably. There's nothing that's going to wonk out.
I love that you're bringing all of this up because I firmly believe that the world doesn't need more businesses. I think we need better businesses. And I think really having this conversation and taking a few steps back and going, what target are we even trying to hit? And do we have the infrastructure that if we start getting closer to that, that will sustain it and not self implode? Because there's been multiple times where you're in business and you're like, this worked up until now, but this will not work to get from 5 million to 10 million or
Yep.
10 million to 20 million. Like it won't work. We don't have the infrastructure for that. So my question is, when I'm thinking about growth or whatever I aspire to be, what would you advise? Do we build the team that is for the big target? Do we set up benchmarks? Like, because I'm looking at, if I know I want to be a $10 million agency and I have 2 sales producers and I know, okay, if sales is the area that I want to focus on, at what stage in the game do we start building out and readjusting the infrastructure?
First of all, fantastic question, Corey. I mean, I think it's this sort of constant recalibration and reconciliation process where you're looking at what your aspirations are, right? And then you're bringing that across to a very clear-headed analysis of what your market opportunity is, right, relative to that aspiration. And again, whatever influences that. And also I think it's important that people consider those aspiration statements and then sort of validating that against some estimate of what's the real market opportunity against your constraints, right? I mean, like I always remind people of this, like everything's easy if you have unlimited time and unlimited money. Right? If that's not an issue, right? It doesn't matter how much time or money it takes. I don't know, a great many people that can accomplish some pretty cool things.
I want that problem.
Yeah, but I think it's that sort of natural assessment of saying, okay, right, here's what we aspire. Here's what the immediate term market opportunity and maybe one evolution forward from where you are today. And then here is the box that we're in terms of capital, in terms of time, and then be very intentional about coming up with that sort of time capital function, saying, okay, that's great. But over the next 9, 12, 18 months, I think there's a legitimate opportunity, even net of all the constraints that we're facing, to be able to go to this next iteration of the business, right? Forget about trying to sort of solve all the world's problems all at once, because it just becomes this sort of exercise in navel gazing, right? It's great and it's interesting to ideate and all the stuff, but it's sort of taking that horizon view and then working it back towards what's that next actionable tranche of opportunity that comports with our position as it exists today or reasonably close, right? And then it's going and building that prioritization function, right? Because again, in a world of absolute plenty, no constraints in terms of time and capital, go do it all, right? But in reality, you're saying, okay, here's what that actionable tranche of the horizon vision is. And it's calibrated against real world sets of circumstances, both an opportunity and constraint. And that's the interval that I'm going to go try and cover in this period of time. And to do that, then here become the logical, reasonable priorities of the go-dos, the things to go execute on in that period of time. And then in that iteration, in that, let's say it's an 18-month, window. And then you're doing your check-ins every month, every 2 months, whatever it happens to be. how are we tracking with what we had expected to see so that you can do necessary course corrections or adaptations to get there, right? But I think that's really what it boils down to. And as my business partner likes to point out with some regularity, is say, look, everyone out there thinks they're a problem solver, right? I mean, you hear that constantly. We live in a world of like however many million consultants, right? And everyone's got the answer, or they got their template, they got their way to solve every problem, right? But so much of it is you sort of do that inventory and kind of process, and you kind of you have those aspirations and you assess the market opportunity. Do they link up? Is that rational? And then you sort of overlay that with that function about okay, but here are the relevant constraints, and net of that, like sort of how do we cover that next interval, which then gives us some subsequent jumping off point, assuming we execute and all that. But it's very, in thinking about prioritization, it's as much knowing what problem to solve as how to solve the problem, right? And so I think from an orienting standpoint, taking some time to sort of reflect on that and think about what problem are we really trying to solve here? What are the priorities? And then going about solving and executing and all the things necessary to sort of realize that next potential, that next interval. And then taking that next inventory. So, okay, here's what the 18 months held. And does it look like what we imagined? And are we where we expected to be? But I think doing it in iterations and intervals and stair stepping versus saying, well, we want to be a $20 million agency by 2028. So we're just going to go load up now. You know what I mean? Like number one, good luck on the capital. But
Yeah.
number two, I'm not sure that's the right thinking, right? I mean,
Yeah.
pick off
Yeah.
that next leg of the race, and then really be thoughtful about how do you attack that part of the journey so that you're sort of engineering it for success.
I could do this all day. Rob, I love this conversation because you're really just echoing, make sure that you're very intentional, make sure that you are very clear and you're choosing the path. Like if you want to kick the door down, great. Make sure that you're choosing the door that you want to kick down and that it fits in with actually the time and the resources that you have available, and not trying to take the whole elephant down, but like, what's the next bite? I think it's such a great reminder to build out these moments of, if we have all of this data, let's actually measure it and implement it and see how we can use it in our favor. Let's take some time to reflect and assess what's working and what's not, and what we actually want to chase, what we want to pursue with our limited resource, our time and attention that does not renew. Like that's what we really want to focus on. I have loved this
Yeah, this has been
conversation.
great, Rob. If somebody wanted to follow you, connect with you, support you, maybe work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I've got a profile on LinkedIn that people can connect with, and I'm fairly active in checking in on that. The business, we certainly have a website. You can find us at www.fidelis-advisors.com. It's FIDELES -ADVISORS.com. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with folks and spend some time with people just to determine if we can be helpful, right? So, certainly feel free to reach out and love to be helpful where we can. And like I said, the things that we focused on, organic growth, productivity and profitability, and sort of managing that margin and profit environment, sustainability, making sure that it can continue, and scalability to make sure it can continue while growing in effective and healthy ways. And all of the kind of details around that's where we really love to help businesses out.
Absolutely. Rob, man, this has been great. We may have to do a round 2 of this
Oh, yeah.
conversation in the near
Oh,
future,
yeah.
but man, thank you so much for coming on The Buzz. We appreciate you. For all of those of you that are listening right now, whether it's the podcast, maybe you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate you. And as always, time and attention are the absolute most valuable assets that we have, and we appreciate you checking out and supporting us and listening to The Buzz. So with that being said, make it great, my friends.